What we have here is a grave injustice. A grave injustice against women, a grave injustice against our church, and most of all, a grave injustice against our loving God who is calling women to the priesthood.
We are not doing something new. We have evidence that there were women priests and women bishops in the early church. Hello, I'm Mary Kay, and I am honored to be here tonight with you, especially following after my hero, Father Roy. So it feels like a momentous time for me to be taking this step in my life. I never considered myself a risk taker. When you said that, Linda, I thought, oh, 6 months ago, I would still have been hiding in the back row because this has been such a daunting process for me. I was raised in a very small town in Ohio called Lancaster, was one of 8 children. Mom was always praying for there to be a priest in the family. And my brothers never quite fulfilled that expectation, shall we say. We were raised in very devout ways. How many of you know rosary rallies? Rosary rallies? Okay, good, a few of you. All-night vigils. You know, it was the kind of upbringing that I don't think many Catholics even can relate to. My parents actually have a chapel in their house. It was a room that has 8 stained glass windows, the 7 sacraments, and then the Holy Family. Jesuits are one of the best educators because they invite us to question. And that was new for me. Questioning was not something I was ever encouraged to do. So started with a spiritual director, dear Father Shell, and he would not bat an eye when I would ask things about the Assumption or the Immaculate Conception or things that I really just always took for granted, but now as a thinking Catholic began to question. But I really didn't want to be a clinical psychologist. I felt that it needed that spiritual dimension. And that was when I first discovered that I could become a chaplain. And actually, many Catholics still don't know that Catholic women can become chaplains. Serving as a chaplain has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life because it's the people who get it. The patients that I would encounter would get it, although they did have some difficulty trying to pigeonhole me. So I was either Sister Mary Kay, which worked until I was pregnant. And then I'll never forget walking into this poor woman who was a Catholic woman, and I was probably 8 months at the time, and introduced myself, and her eyes just got wide, and she said, I didn't know nuns could get pregnant. And I said, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm pregnant, but I'm not a nun. It was one of those most awkward, and I've only once been called Father Kushner, which is also quite awkward. Okay, so, but for the most part, people have been ready and willing to accept me, even to the point where when someone would want to be anointed, I work in end of life. So I was a hospice chaplain for many years and currently am the palliative care chaplain. End of life because that's where the questions really come up. It's where people begin to ask questions about God and suffering. What's it all about? What does it mean? And those are the kind of conversations that most engage me. Really was times when people would want to be anointed, and I'd say, oh, wait a minute, I've been working with you for 2 weeks now, but I got to go find somebody who has a collar because I'm not allowed to anoint you. And the people would look at me and say, well, I want you to anoint me. And so that was a huge struggle for me and led to a lot of soul searching about, you know, technically I should go get a priest, but spiritually, you know, the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, which am I called to? So I will confess there were some underground anointings that happened, and much to the delight of myself and those who I ministered to. Many of my peers then were what we called jumping ship. They just decided they were going to become either Episcopalian or Lutheran. After all these studies, it just didn't make sense to not move towards ordination. So I have tried many times to pretend to be a Lutheran or an Episcopalian, and it just doesn't work for me. I'm glad that it can work for some of my sisters who went on to be ordained and served as pastors. But I always felt false. It always just felt as if I was pretending. And so, wanting to be a person of integrity and authenticity, I always said, I want my presence to speak louder than my absence. So I have stayed. And actually, at that time, I was kind of hopeful that things were about to happen. And now, 23 years later, I've discovered that they are happening. It was in 2007 when I first heard Patricia Friesen at the Call to Action conference in 2007, and that was the first time I heard her tell her story. And after she told that story, she said, "So is there anyone here who feels called to be ordained?" And I found my hand going up, and I thought, what am I doing? And she called us forward and had the group at that time bless us in our call. It was then that I knew this was something I needed to explore. So kicking and screaming, I decided to apply to become a candidate. I became a candidate, and then there's a 10-unit curriculum that we need to complete. So I was ordained a deacon in August of '09, and am now going to be ordained a priest June 13th in Iowa City. So things I want you to know is you're all invited. I am opening this to the public, which is new. For a while, we felt very paranoid, for good reason. So ordinations at one time were kept secret, and we would hire security and those kinds of things. But I have felt as if this needs to come out. This needs to be open. We need to promote a church of inclusion, one that recognizes men and women, gays, lesbians, all those who are hurting and in such need of the message of the gospel, which is a message of unconditional love. I don't know, it seems we need to be reminded of that sometimes. Very basic, very basic. We are not doing something new. We have evidence that there were women priests and women bishops in the early church. We have Dorothy Irvin, who is our historian, who actually went to Rome, and she has found icons of women bishops. So if you go on our website, romancatholicwomenpriests.org, you will see her work that traces the history of women priests and bishops. It's been kept a very good secret for too long. So I encourage you to become informed. It's also important to know that celibacy was not imposed as a requirement for ordination until the Council of Trent. And we know that it was imposed because of the whole issue of inheritance. They were realizing that having to pay for these kids of these married priests was a problem. The easiest way to deal with that is to say you have to be celibate. So literally, men had to leave their wives and children to remain priests. And that's another huge injustice that has been well covered up by the church. I believe celibacy is a gift. Some people have that gift, and I very much value that gift. But it's a gift and can never be imposed as a requirement. So I believe that with that, there should be married priests as well as women priests. And I hope that we, as a church, are claiming the truth of inclusion on all levels, so that one day our church will truly be Catholic in the fullest sense, a universal church.